Hey guys, Mustached Tom here to review the movie Ultraman Rising. Now, I've not seen any trailers for this, but I did come across it, so I decided to give it the good old check out, and now I'm here to review it and say what happens in the movie and how good it is or bad it is as objectively as possible. So the movie begins with our narration about our main character talking about superheroes and Kaiju's roles in the world that they inhabit. That they are not necessarily villains or heroes, but sort of just another part of nature in this universe, as it were. But in order to make sure that those Kaiju don't make, amok in the towns, they have their superhero named Ultraman to help them out. And we learn his identity, Sato, and we follow the main character named Kenji, or later learn, or change to I think they just call him Ken at some point. They change his name. And we see their area or home get attacked, and Ultraman going to work, we see that 20 years then quickly pass. So, shifting into that, we cut to 20 years later, and we're now following Ken as he's following in his early interest of being in a baseball team. And we see him try to balance that with fighting Kaiju, and not doing a particularly good job at it either. But his, work as a baseball player, he seems to be the main star that everyone seems to be attracted to in terms of attention. So he gets an interview, being the star player and all, and this interviewer asks some personal questions about his heritage. And he goes on the defensive, playing his personality, or the personality that he's sort of personified, likely in other interviews. It seems to highly come across as such. But we do see that during this Kaiju attack, or at least one of them, that there is indeed an additional force known as the Kaiju Defense Force that is prompted to also make sure that the city is safe. So they have an additional little thing outside of Ultraman. But during one of his games, or during his battle, he had suffered an injury on his arm in particular, and it follows through with his practice as he feels his injury coming to sway him down. And he's kind of tired of the Ultraman gig, as it were, causing him injury to, combat, in a way, his ability to play baseball. And indeed, we see him, at least initially, playing fairly badly, but then he switches to the other side, the side that he's not injured on, and still able to hit a grand slam, so he's not affected that gravely. However, during his game, another Kaiju of the giant bird variety attacks. But it doesn't seem to be attacking. More so, when we are, as the audience, are looking at it, it seems to be hovering towards this ball-shaped object. And when he sees it, from his perspective, this thing is, it just sort of came into the territory, and it seems threatening from his position, so he goes on the attack. So the creature seems obsessed with the ball. We see the Kaiju Defense Force, we see Ultraman, all of this is coming into fray. And he's trying to, sway them off of the creature, because I think the point of this scene is to set up that they're not trying to necessarily kill the Kaiju, but push them back to kind of wander back to wherever they belong in this scenario. It seems to be the, letting nature back into its habitat sort of mentality, except, kaiju are giant, representations of that, I guess. However, during this little scuffle, the defense force sends a missile launch, and the kaiju, the giant bird one, is killed in the process, leaving the ball thing behind. Inside the ball lays an egg, and thus a baby kaiju is born. Thus, the little creature there you see on Ultraman's arm, the little pink thing. So, he kind of instinctively has the egg with him, and he's kind of trying to figure out what to do with it once it's hatched. Trying to figure out, because apparently there's an entire kaiju island present in this world, but its current location is unknown. And this little baby begins to cry, and it's simultaneously with doing that starts beaming out some blast. He ignores his dad's calls and tries to, he kind of lashes out on his own dad, his dad being the original Ultraman in this case, caring more for the kaiju, as I presented him, being the one to push the creatures back into their habitat, rather than over his family. Or at least that's what his son's perspective seemed to have been. So, as he sees that the baby has latched onto him, he proceeds to try to take care of it. Or at least the little ball robot butler, I guess I'll call her, seems to persist that he needs to take care of the baby. So he does so, shifting between his human form and superhero form to show that the baby, that it's the same person, and eventually the baby catches on. So it learns at a fairly quick pace, as we see. We see that he's trying to figure out how to eat its food, and then he learns that this particular kaiju eats fish through its echolocation ability. And all of this caretaking, as it were, causes him being too tired to play during his sessions. And in a fit of this little montage, or, little setup, we see that the creature is shown this little show, and it learns a little dance. And this dance is a particular call-out, because I noticed it immediately. It's the classic vintage Godzilla dance. And if you don't know what that is, I would just highly recommend looking it up. It is identical to that dance, dare I say, that I think that it's paying homage to that very Godzilla dance. Anyway, so we see more throughout this montage of him being more and more tired, and him pressuring to try to figure out how to deal with this baby. So he calls the interview lady, who also has a daughter, perchance, and she's trying to gauge how she tackles her job and having a child at the same time. Of course, he has two jobs, technically speaking, his baseball career and his gig as a superhero, and now on top of being a dad. Pretty much is where the movie takes it from this point moving forward. And in a swell of things, we see that, again, he's asked more about his life, and after the fact, we do see that the kaiju does indeed begin to pick up on the things that the father likes and begins to imitate, the imitation phase, as it were, in the baby phase, and it begins to practice doing baseball swings. So, he gives her a bat and offers to teach her how to move about the field as well. So she kind of masters that little sequence eventually. But the Defense Force is moving their own drones to make sure that this creature is found. They know it's somewhere out there still. They saw the remnants of the egg. So he goes to dine with the interview lady. I'm not ever really sure if they were trying to betray a crush, because they never take that route by the end of the movie, so I'll say that their relationship is sort of casual, I guess, throughout. This is the best way of putting it. However, during their not date, the baby breaks through the barrier, kind of on a whim, and begins to move throughout the house, kind of beginning to look for, well, her dad, I guess I'll just say at this rate. So, we see more of its abilities, like the ability to do a super jump, and we see it move throughout the city. And this is when the Defense Force, when, they see its location and the people are, on their phones, and they start to record and do that thing. And, it's not as terrifying as, say, a regular kaiju. It's a baby kaiju, so people are kind of like, oh, that's kind of cute, but, a little bit startling, I guess. So it's sort of that attitude, which I kind of appreciate, that there's sort of like a mix, sort of vibe going on there. At any rate, so we see that the baby is, out there, and we see it learn this song, and, it has all these little, like, gimmicks, or, like, little things that it latches on to, so that's sort of like what helps the baby, like, navigate, or, quote-unquote navigate through the city. More like wandering in a lost sort of fashion. Kind of like chasing keys, as it were. More so. Even going out to, like, chasing after these go-karters that happen to be in this circumstance. So, she, comes across these, like, drones, and hits it, like, well, like a bat, with the bat motion, as it were, and wrecks the drones. So, she's kind of catching on how to sort of defend herself from these drones. And eventually, he catches up to her. So he calls his dad to get his help. And the forces are kind of like back at their place, trying to figure out what to do now. And we learn that the leader has a connection to, I believe, one of the other characters. I think that's the setup here, at least. Maybe it was meant to be secretive. I'm not entirely sure what like, he has his own family, that's for sure. That's pretty quintessential to, like, his beliefs. I think the inclination is meant to be that his family passed away due to Ultraman's negligence to save, them from a certain kaiju attack or something along those lines. I'm pretty sure that's, like, the main, like, thing that they're going for here. It's just that his, the daughter that we see of him does look pretty identical to another character, so I'm not sure if it's meant to be the same character, or not. Anyway. So, we kind of, track back to the dad and him trying to figure out what to do with this kaiju. They're figuring out, okay, so Kaiju Island's gonna be, filled with bigger kaiju, so that's probably not gonna be good immediately. And keeping it here, well, that will have its own risk, but it's probably more worth to try to teach it how to defend itself properly. And at this point is given a name. So now we'll just refer to her as Emmy, because it's the name that she is given. And we see another montage now that she's given a name. We see that with the dad's help, that he's able to more sufficiently take care of Emmy, as well as up his game with the baseball players, treat them more like a team rather than being the sole star. So, coinciding job with parental, shtick kind of going on there. And one thing that was established early on is that his ability to stay in this super form seems to consistently be temporary. Indicated that little blue chest piece turns like red, or like it shifts back and forth when he's running out of time, in order to him to be back into human form. So the Kaiju Defense Force move in on their location once more. Emmy defends them by stopping the drones, again using her abilities. And then after the fact, enters the new larva state after that. So they went off to some woodsy area to do all this caretaking part after the fact, by the way. But still found, regardless, and even tracked at this point. So we see that the dad gets attacked by this drone attack, and in that sequence, so we see that he has to deal with his own, at the conceptual time, belief of loss. But again, that little beacon was attached. But we do see that her larva state Emmys caused her to gain wings, so now she has that ability. Instead of just pouncing, she could just fly. So, indeed begins to fly as intended. So again, he loses, or from his perception, loses his dad in this attack on his house in this little woodsy state, I guess I'll call it. And with the tracker still on Emmy, they are like, should we keep that on? Because that's actually also helping them keep track of Emmy too, on top of their enemy forces, so it's sort of a double-edged sword, really. And indeed, they use this robot kaiju that seems to resemble the flying kaiju that we saw at the beginning of the movie, or not, I wouldn't say beginning, but near beginning of the movie. Point being is that it's the one and the same, except it's been altered to have robots and mechanics all over it, as we learn later on. So, Ultraman kind of is, during this little sequence, this later battle sequence, with the robot kaiju. So, we have Emmy heading towards it, sort of leading it away toward the island, presumably. And we have the Defense Force following them, and then we have Ultraman trying to defend them, and they're trying to, has been established pretty early on, they're trying to destroy all of Kaiju Island to make sure that none of these Kaiju ever attack ever again. So, they get ready to defend. They have quite a bit of a kerfuffle, in which we even see Ultraman revert back at a point, and we see the OG Ultraman, Ultra Dad as he's called in the credits, come onto the scene and defend his son. And the two of them with the two Kaiju, because the robot Kaiju regains its own abilities after the baby awakens him with the echo ability, and enough of its metal parts removed from it. So with that combination, the four of them now sort of take on the Defense Force, and these attacks get kind of close to where the reporter is heading at the time. We have moments of the son coming to save the father, and we have this really epic shot of the four lined up and them four firing their four distinct lasers that the KDF bot that has been formed here. Led by the leader, by the way, who sent the rest of his men home because he was like, I'm not losing anyone else. I'm willing to sacrifice my life. So, even though he's the antagonist of the film, we see that he does have, a real sense of, responsibility for his men at this very moment. We see that he cares for his family, which leads him to do a lot of, the deeds that he thinks is right from his perspective. So I like that from this movie as well, is that it's not just pure villainy for villainy sake. He does come across as someone way more human in that way. But he gets ready to self-destruct, having, feeling that there's no other way to lose. So the son, our current Ultraman, creates a bubble around them to make sure that none of the others are affected by the bomb that will head off. And we cut to some X amount of time later after this defensive maneuver to him being interviewed. He has the injury, the arm injury still, about how his team has, sufficiently made it, successful and all that. We see the two Kaijus begin to hover or fly towards their homestead, the Kaiju Island, aka. So that's, and the Ultraman and the two Ultramen help them find that location at this point in the movie. And then at the after credit sequence, we see an incoming call from the mom, which is she is still alive. So there's that as well. And that was Ultraman Rising. And I gotta say, this movie was really, really good. I liked the sort of hitting the persona character and seeing that version of him versus, the version of him trying to figure out, all this superhero stuff and all this. And then being thrust upon this, new responsibility. And that scene really comes together when he picks up the Kaiju in the background abruptly, or not even abruptly, but it shifts behind him to be this very moonlight, sort of background. And it's one of the very moments of a visual storytelling beat of him accepting this new responsibility and being yeah, I'm going to be a dad. You know what? In this case, all the baseball stuff aside, I'm just gonna do it, just sort of leaping head on in, as it were. And it's also a moment of beauty, as we see in the background, but we do see that shift from, that background to suddenly back into the reality of there's an an attack still within the premises, and yeah, so I do appreciate all of that. I like the little nods and reference, the very clear reference to Godzilla here. Um, in terms of the thing with the reporter, I feel like that the beginning bit is a little bit like but I think it does pick up as the movie progresses, and I guess like the call is probably like the most like we get out of anything about like you know responsibility and balancing things. So that's like the only scene that really she really I feel plays a part in this sort of grander narrative. So I think like yeah, you know, versus her being a reporter and all that. So I do think that those scenes definitely are a little bit far and few between for her in particular, but that's fine. Um, as for the dad, I like the sort of perception of his sort of persona, as it were, his persona as the original Ultraman, how he's perceived, this grand superhero, as it were, and the son coming across that some significantly time later, and how that leads into or leaded into this sort of perception of dealing with kaiju in a particular way, and it was only until this baby kaiju came into his life where that's like, oh, it sort of like clicks without him even almost realizing it did, which I really appreciate that it's almost like second nature almost, again with that background shift scene. Like it didn't even like occur to him like, oh, it's probably how his father felt about all the kaiju in a way, and because they're a part of this particular world, so they are inhabit it, so make peace with that instead of destroying it as the other man, the leader of the kaiju defense force, you know, wants to do, and he wants to do that because his own home was attacked by kaiju. So he has a reason to want. It's personalized to him. It's personalized to his family, which he does argue throughout consistently is important. He even realizes that kaiju, recognize family. So it's remains consistent throughout. All of these little bits and bobs that really help the narrative come together. Um, I think this movie could have been tightened up a little bit in the earlier section, I think. Um, but I think overall, with a little bit of editing in terms of like how characters, he survives that explosion. Like, I don't know, I don't know what the Ultraman suit is capable of. There's no really distinct scene that shows us, I guess. So him surviving that is like, all that sort of stuff. So things of that nature, I think, could be the things that you can improve on. The more logistical questions that sort of rise out of this movie. In terms of setting up the world building for anyone that might not be familiar, because Ultraman, I feel like, well, it's Ultraman Rising, so I guess there's just an Ultraman film, I guess. I haven't seen it, but anyway, I think as is, I probably, in terms of the score, I probably aim for an 8 out of 10. I think this movie does a lot more positive in that regard overall. I think that its tightening up is in the more minute details that could help you pick apart, just from a world building perspective, some of the earlier stuff about you know all maybe some of the setup stuff leading up to him becoming the hero, stuff like that. Just little bits and bobs that you can adjust to help this movie become even more peak than it already is. I would already consider it. But yeah, still overall really, really solid. So that's my review of Ultraman Rising, and if you ended up enjoying it, then please feel free to like, comment, and subscribe. Also make sure to check out those links in the description. I want to hydrate to my petition to help out smaller YouTubers, so get to my PayPal where you can help support me and my channel directly, and third to my Discord server you can join, collab, chill, do all that cool stuff for free. And until next time everyone, bye bye.